Well, thank you so much, Andrea, and thank you for that very warm introduction. And it is a real honor and pleasure to be here with all of you today and to have Andrea, who her mega trends is something that I follow very closely and very much looking forward to her new book, Pandora's Box, to come out very soon. And fantastic to be here with Anna as well. So, yeah, so I think, Andrea really set the stage for some of the things that I'm going to be talking about when we're talking about energy, trade, and climate. You know, as Andrea pointed out, sort of geopolitical tectonic rupturing. Yeah, we're seeing, I mean, it's the amount of turbulence that is sort of in our systems is quite extraordinary. Even if you look for historical precedent, I think it's kind of everything all at once, in terms of what we're seeing in terms of, dramatic shifts in trade, a lot of uncertainty across political systems, and across, and how corporations, how companies, organizations, institutions are responding to these sort of rapid shifts that include also tremendous technological change that's sort of changing at a pace. Again, that is, again, I think sort of highlights that word, that term, unprecedented. And I think one of the things that's really important when we talk about energy and trade is the fact that, we have seen significant retreat, right, along some of the environmental climate guidance that has, that sort of really started to take shape, really after the Paris Climate Accords in 2015, where we saw a lot of corporations really committing to net zero. We saw a lot of, emphasis on disclosure and compliance around ESG. Some of that has shifted. In fact, here in the United States, is that climate risk management guidelines across financial institutions have been removed. Now, that said, I think this is what's really important is the idea that many companies, though, are remaining quite steadfast in their commitments. And they, in some ways, have to. And they have to because the supply chain risks that they are feeling quite acutely, right, across different systems is such that they are, what I call they have to innovate for resilience. And they sort of have to really very much sort of look at across their inputs. Of course, we're seeing headline news now around rare earths. So if you are a tech or you work in the, kind of the industrial space, many of these inputs are quite critical for your operations and for your supply chain. So responding to these sort of, somewhat sort of these massive trade hiccups, but also sort of thinking about how do we recycle better? How do we sort of think about alternative inputs where that is possible? Again, not always easy, but again, sort of thinking about, where small, very targeted innovations can sort of address both, both as a mitigating factor against climate and emissions, but also as a risk resilience. So I think the antenna for risk is quite high these days across companies, and that's one of the things that I hear a lot. And then again, sort of thinking about the affordability aspect. And that has become a huge issue around the world is affordability as we're sort of thinking about this, massive technological change, electrification. How do we do it affordably so that, here in the United States, across states, we're really sort of confronting higher electricity prices? And how do you meet that challenge while still sort of building out the electrification systems that are required? And again, not to make this US centric, but we have many parts of the world that are still not yet fully electrified. So, how do we bring that deeper electrification, energy access, do so in an affordable way, but also do so in a way that is supporting lower carbon emitting technologies across our system. So securing affordable supply is critical. There I am. I put up my 5 minute timer, which is kind of giving me some um,
Keep going.
circular.
I think we have a little more time because we started earlier. So if you need 10
Just
minutes to make your
I'll just do
presentation,
2 more
that's great.
minutes, but I appreciate
Yeah,
because I really want to hear from Anna and have a
sure.
conversation. I think that something I've been looking at, my students look at, is circular design processes. So how do you sort of, and I'm seeing many more companies sort of use this language. Partially it's not because they necessarily want to, it's because they have to, because they really are thinking about how do you reduce waste? How do you, again, make more sort of efficient use of your resources from point A to point Z? So a lot more circularity in terms of the design and the thinking. And again, part of that is not being driven by policy. Now, in some countries, it is driven by policies, but in the absence of policy targets and direction, companies are doing it again. Part of it is cost savings, part of it is in order to meet and have more sustainable supply chains. And then the other thing is, aligning finance with sustainability, transition finance, carbon linked instruments, climate risk assessments. Again, I think this is really important because as we are seeing across, kind of many, I would say many regions, is we're seeing a somewhat of a retreat or softening of commitments to ESG. That said, at the individual company level, I think many companies are saying, no, we are looking at it. And I think this is something that, Andrea really points out is the situational side, is that the context matters, is the type of company, what is it that you're producing? Where are your inputs at risk? How can you build more sustainable supply chains? How can you think about your energy systems? Again, companies work within the systems that they exist in, but sort of really sort of thinking across the board about how they can sort of reduce risk in their operations. So I'll stop there because I'd really love to engage in a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. Those are fantastic nuggets of information and important trends that we're all looking at. And of course, the devil is always in the details in the sense that each country, each company has its own experience, its own footprint, its own relationships. And, one thing I would be really interested in your perspective on, and Anna, please jump in with your questions or comments as well. But I would love to hear from you how you think the US sort of polarized discussion and impact of this ESG, anti-ESG, pro-ESG, mostly anti-ESG, anti-woke kind of conversation that we've been witnessing for several years now, but now it's part of the government policy. But as you point out, it's also each company is kind of doing its own thing depending on its own business rationale. So I think that's really important. But how is that US as the biggest economy in the world, let's put it that way, affecting the ESG dialogue or development in other parts of the world? Do you have any sort of general set of patterns or effects that you've seen yet? Or is it just basically everybody's doing their own thing?
No, and I think, it's a great question. Even here in the United States, I think in some ways there's been kind of a shift in the narrative. And in some ways, it's actually very interesting. I think JP Morgan is a great example. Last week, they came out with $1.2 billion commitment, and very much focused on sustainability, but under sort of under economic security. And so economic security and investments in sustainable energy, renewable energy, the supply chain. So again, in some cases in the United States, it's not a complete withdrawal from ESG commitments, but a kind of a repackaging without sort of very explicitly sort of calling it ESG. And I would say in Europe, the commitment to sustainability, the commitment to carbon emission targets remain strong. And again, under sort of, rather turbulent conditions, right? Because it's never been easy, but I think it's become even harder. And I think also I would say in Asia as well, you are seeing a kind of continuity again in terms of sort of understanding that much of ESG is also about realizing sort of constraints in our systems, and how do we sort of meet those constraints in a sustainable way, and doing one of the focuses of this conference is good governance, and how do you govern well and navigate very sort of turbulent conditions which we're currently in, and do so in terms of thinking about sort of the best resources, the best inputs, remaining, I think, with that sort of purpose-driven compass for your company. So, I do think that again, there's been sort of a shift in the narrative, and again, the term ESG in some places maybe is less widely used, but I do think the overall sort of background and the implementation continues, just again, oftentimes under sort of more of a security
Right.
umbrella, which companies are feeling very acutely.
I'll just throw in one more example from around the world, and then Anna, I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this. Um, I work closely with a governance institute in Malaysia. Even though Malaysia isn't the largest economy in the world, they are really setting the tone when it comes to the connection of governance and sustainability. And one of the things that they did a few years ago is pass a law that says that public company board directors must be certified in sustainability and ESG. They need to go through a course, which turns out to be 2 full days. I'm faculty for that. And in that course, they learn the basics, the overview, and then they're held accountable by the law and the regulator to understand how climate risks are also opportunities in terms of their own business. And so it really is putting money where their mouth is in terms of holding the boards accountable, the boards of private companies, of for-profit companies, um, and their overall governance. So I find that in Singapore is another country that does this. I don't think that there's any other country that does this, but other than those two. And that to me is where you bring everything together, and hold companies, businesses, countries accountable. But I will stop. Anna, please, your thoughts on all of this.
Very, very interesting. And the couple things that resonated with me is when Carolyn said everything all at once. I think all of us feel that way, whether I definitely feel that in technology, but aside from technology, and that's a bipartisan issue. No matter where you are on the right or the left, I think everybody is feeling everything all at once. And it's something that we always have to keep in mind as we make our strategy. The other piece that really resonated is that even when legislation does not require you to have sustainability goals, that innovating for resilience and affordability are two things that every company has to do, again, regardless of what their leanings are, and they're going to do it under maybe a different umbrella and call it something else. Like that economic security label is a really solid one, but I completely agree, and that's what I'm seeing everywhere as well.
Yeah. And I'd love to hear from anyone who's in this group, in this panel. If you have comments or questions for Caroline or any of us, anytime, just raise your hand or put something in the. I'm not sure the chat works as well as it should, because we are in an overall chat. So we may have like 400 people chat. So I'm not sure if we can get your particular comments or questions, but if you do, raise your hand, and we'd love to engage with you as much as possible. I will sort of put a final touch on this segment of our panel which is this whole issue of nomenclature that Carolyn was underscoring, and so did Anna just now, about how we're changing some of the language, but we're actually doing the same thing or doing it in a slightly different way. But I think it always goes back to, yes, so we have a polarized political debate, certainly in the US, maybe in some other places as well. But using words to denigrate a certain kind of practice, for example, woke, anti-woke, these kinds of things, isn't very business smart, in my opinion. What's going to happen is you'll have JP Morgan, announcing an economic security package, which is really about energy security or energy transition, right? And so businesses overall, there are some exceptions, but businesses overall are driven by rationality, by facts, by figures, by data, by trends. And so they don't want to be told by governments or regulators to be on this side of the political spectrum or that side. They just want to cater to their shareholders and their stakeholders. So overall, business is a rational actor and will mutate and modify to remain rational, I think, at least most business, not maybe everyone. But so I think that's the silver lining in the cloud for now in terms of how we approach this in the US, but maybe in some other parts of the world as well.
Andrea, if I could just, there are two comments, there are two
Sure.
questions. I
Oh,
don't want to take too much time. I think
sure.
the question about Africa is a very important one, right? Africa is not 100% electrified. It is not 100% access to energy, which again, I always tell my students, you can't really have development without access to affordable, reliable energy and electricity. And so there is, how to do that in a way that is, less carbon intensive, right? So not following the same industrial pathway that, for example, the United States and other countries, which are, have historic, very heavy emitters. But there's also a real strong business case as the sort of fastest growing continent, as extraordinary place in terms of for emerging economies, really sort of bringing more energy access across the continent. And again, around choices also really does matter. And so how do you sort of bring the most affordable sources of energy into systems? Again, we have examples where coal consumption around the world continues to go up. It is a conundrum, but we also have solar prices globally that have fallen to its lowest levels, right? So again, we have different sources. And then the last thing I would say in terms of, yeah, I think it's very important to emphasize, companies that are steadfast. They are not, the example of Apollo, the example of L'Oreal, it's reputationally, right? If you're sort of midway into, and then all of a sudden you change, like what are the company's values? So I think it's very important to highlight the companies that are maybe not doing large pronouncements, big headlines, but remain very, very committed to their sustainability objectives. And again, part of this is risk aversion, is also risk reduction, and the fact that they really do. They see this is not just a want to have. This is a we must have. So I'll stop there.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Carolyn. Well, I think we're in our midway point here. I think we gained a few minutes because we started early. So I'd love for Anna now to tackle our second main theme, which is the role of technology and innovation in sustainable business practices. How can emerging technologies like AI, blockchain, and green energy innovations drive sustainable transitions in business operations? And I can't think of anyone better suited to give us that general sense and the themes that you're seeing in this space. Anna, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Carolyn, for setting the scene so powerfully. I would like to build on what both of you shared by zooming in on the role of digital innovation and emerging technologies in enabling more sustainable, resilient, and intelligent business enterprises and practices. Over the last few years, many organizations across various sectors have made bold sustainability commitments, as we were saying before, net zero, circularity, transparency. But now the pressure is shifting from ambition to execution because we have to. That's where the role of technology really becomes super fundamental, because the truth is you cannot meet 2030 goals with 2010 systems. So what we're seeing is that sustainability leaders of today are not necessarily the ones with the biggest targets and biggest commitments that they're stating. They're the ones that are building the operational and the digital muscle to turn sustainability into the core way of doing business, and it becomes embedded in that business. So it's not really about running an ESG report once a year. It's about embedding sustainability into how you design, operate, and make decisions every single day. So that's where the emerging tech starts to make a meaningful difference. Now, let's start with AI, the most talked about tool in the room. And I do want to emphasize that it's a tool. That's all it is. While it can certainly be overhyped, it's also one of the most practical enablers of sustainable performance, especially in complex, resource-intensive industries. One example I've seen is the use of AI for predictive maintenance. When AI can detect and prevent equipment failures early, it doesn't just save money, although that's a bonus and that's a key driver for a lot of companies. It also reduces energy waste, avoids material loss, it extends lifespan of assets, and that's a triple win. Another space is real-time energy optimization. Whether it's manufacturing, logistics, data center operations, and we all know data center operations are expanding at a very rapid pace, and that investment is just increasing every day. I see that in the news. AI models, so they're really helping teams make smarter decisions, dynamically adjusting energy usage, reducing peak loads, aligning operations with carbon intensity forecasts. But perhaps the biggest unlock is when AI is not treated as a separate initiative, but is embedded directly into those core business processes. You're going to notice a theme that the more you embed it into what you do, rather than do something on the side, the more it's going to stick. So it really helps frontline teams make faster and more sustainable decisions with confidence. And now let's talk about data, because technology doesn't drive impact on its own, data does, when it's made usable. The old approach was to collect sustainability data after the fact, at least from what I've seen and in the organizations where I've been, and then to report, to audit, and to respond. But that doesn't cut it anymore. The new model is about making sustainability data operational. It means integrating environmental, operational, financial data in near real time so that decisions about cost, performance, and impact are made together in the silos and in a proactive way. I've seen organizations build out cross-functional dashboards that show how much energy is being used and where and why and what it's costing. But there's very few organizations that are doing that. It's a target that all of us should have. And these tools are shifting the mindset from ESG as a compliance and check the box type of exercise to a performance driver. Now, AI and blockchain get the headlines, but some of the most exciting sustainable innovations are actually happening in what I call the quiet technologies, things like digital twins, which are allowing businesses to model energy and material flows before anything is physically built. Imagine how much risk that reduces, how much waste, how many surprises are gone because of that. Edge computing is another one. It's minimizing data load on the cloud while enabling faster and local decision making. A lot of resources are not being spent that way, especially important in distributed operations. And as we were saying earlier, circular design tools are helping companies reimagine materials and packaging and product life cycles from the ground up. So these innovations are not flashy for the sake of it, they're purposeful. And they help answer the question, how do we do more with less? Part of that affordability conundrum we were talking about before. And design systems that regenerate rather than extract. And now let's talk about technology. You can't really talk about technology without talking about people. Because the best system, the smartest model, the most beautiful dashboard is useless if nobody's using it or trusting it or understanding it. And that's why change management, digital literacy, and cross-functional collaboration are so critical. And I spent a big portion of my time doing that. The most successful organization I've seen are investing not just in the tools, but in the talent and building capabilities across the businesses so that sustainability isn't something that just sits in a report, but lives in daily decision making. So to wrap all that up, the big idea here is technology is not the answer to sustainability, but it's an essential bridge. It's a bridge between goals and action, between complexity and clarity, between data and decision. And the challenge and the opportunity is to use these tools intentionally to solve real business problems, not just implement new platforms, to build systems that are not only smart, but also sustainable, and not only sustainable, but also resilient. And I believe the organizations that do it well, they use digital innovation to drive real progress and not just meet their goals, will outperform on every dimension.
Anna, are you done?
Yeah.
It's what you've given us so much gold to think about, and so much to unpack. And I'll just ask you a couple of questions. There's been a couple of really great comments coming in about the environmental impact of this sort of AI explosion, the data centers, the water impact, the energy and electricity impact. We're seeing that in the US for sure. Electricity rates are going up already. But I'd love to hear your take on that. And then I'd like to hear Carolyn's, because both of you are experts in aspects or in the whole of this issue.
I think it's a really big topic that people are not spending enough time on. The amount of investment in creating more data centers and just investing more and more in the capacity of everything that is out there, models that require more and more processing power, which means more and more electricity. So that's something that we as technology leaders need to have top of mind and say, that's where that edge computing comes in. I've spent a lot of time with my team talking through how do we keep the energy consumption local to the particular area, because the more we spread it over the world and the more we transmit, the more energy we're using. It's not good for our environment, but it's also not good for our cost structure because we're duplicating a lot of the information. So one of the biggest strategies that we need to have is, one, we need to have awareness of what our usage is, but two, we need to try to come up with the cost benefits to the organization so that we're not pushed into that direction unnecessarily.
And just give folks a primer on what edge computing is, because not everybody is immersed as you are.
Edge computing is computing that is sitting local to wherever you are, so it doesn't need to transmit things to the internet or to other locations. So if you have your phone, to just use the processing power on the phone, for example, rather than have to go in the cloud and use processing there.
Yeah, and that interestingly, we had a big outage of AWS in the United States just a couple of days ago. Big cloud computing storage area, and it threw a lot of services out of whack all over the world. So having these alternative distributed edge location kinds of options is very important. Carolyn, your thoughts on some of that?
Yeah, and Anna, thank you so much. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant comments, and really, I'm just so many fantastic insights. Um, yeah, no, I mean, I'm running a summit in a couple of weeks on AI, energy, and infrastructure, and of course, it's this is geopolitical, right? We have, the race for AI supremacy, for example, which I have a problem with that kind of language, but it is highly energy intensive. That said, I think many of the developers of data centers and the tech companies they understand that they're how the looking at sort of the energy sources that are powering the data centers, reducing water consumption. And we're seeing sort of some of the very dramatic numbers that are before us. That said, I think the location of data centers is very important in terms of looking for um, sites that, for example, have for climate considerations, right? In terms of going to very sort of dry areas can be problematic. That said, I think, and Andrea, I think this kind of connects in some ways to the AWS outage, but we are seeing much more data localization and data sovereignty. So, countries also don't want to be dependent, right, on or um, uh, vulnerable. And so I see that in Japan, for example, South Korea, Singapore, which, have sort of data localization strategies and plans in place. But I think it's an ongoing, when you really think about it, we're at kind of the early stages of the sort of AI sort of pathway that's before us. And so we're going to be seeing more and more. And I think the energy intensity around compute, I think there's a real sort of drive to bring that down. So to bring the energy intensity around compute power. So that's, I think, something that I think we have many labs and many tech companies that are sort of working towards, finding ways to do more with less.
Thank you for that great sort of addition to this conversation. I have a very important question for you, Anna, but before I go there, I want to just mention one more thing, which is both of you have talked about energy and tech and AI. And I think the even bigger picture that we all have to think about is that we are entering something that is akin to the fifth industrial or post-industrial revolution. We are there. And it's not just about Gen AI and agentic AI and all this other stuff. It's about a bunch of other things. You mentioned edge computing. There's all kinds of new material science that is being discovered, biotech and synthetic bio. There's all this explosion. And a lot of it is enabled by Gen AI and agentic AI and other things that are being developed. So I think we need to keep that context clear that this is part of a much bigger thing that I think we've never seen before in human history. And we have both the awe of being part of this and the responsibility from a sustainability, a biodiversity. All these things are so important to us. But I want to ask you something, Anna, that I think is it's certainly racking my brains, and I think most other people who are thinking about this. How is agentic AI something that we can understand and control? Because at the end of the day, the human in the loop issue is going to be completely eviscerated by agentic AI if it goes out of control. So your thoughts on this? I think it's a really important topic.
And it's a really tough answer because right now and really in the future, creation of agents or agentic AI is a very distributed process. And so we would all collectively need to make agreements of what's okay and what's not okay. And in our divided world globally, what are the odds of something like that happening? So that's where the danger is. So the best thing that I can imagine doing is educating people and continuing warning about the potential consequences and hoping that people would listen and believe. But also, we need to find a logical, rational reason. Like when you were saying earlier that business is typically a rational actor. So we need to appeal to the rationality of organizations and people that are building it for them to understand, educate, and then appeal to their rationality. But that's a really tough thing to do. So I don't think anybody will have an answer. Even when you hear Sam Altman talk about the potential or any of the other CEOs of these technologies, they're just as worried as we are.
Yeah, but at the same time, they're kind of going forward without guardrails. At least the big technology leaders, most of them are US based. They are going forward without guardrails. Most of them, not all of them. The Anthropic CEO is talking about some of the guardrails we need, but most others are just moving unfettered, and that scares me a lot.
Yeah, because they're competing with each other and they have to
Right,
stay competitive.
Yeah, I think
correct.
Anna's point, and I think there was just a letter. I think it's well worth it for everyone
Yes, I
reading.
signed it actually. I signed it.
Yo, amazing. So you should talk about it, right? In terms
Yes,
of
yes.
this, super intelligence and, if it goes unfettered, no regulation, we're kind of not like it's like where are we going, right? We
Yeah,
don't really know, and yet there's no kind of, as you pointed out, guardrails and what might we be, heading towards that we won't be able to control when we won't be able to retreat once we're there.
And the
yeah.
problem is you can't create these guardrails in a state, in a city, in a country. It has to be global guardrails that are then maintained somehow. And what are the odds of that happening?
I think near zero, given what's happening with climate, for example,
Right?
right? I mean, there are good actors, but there's a lot of bad actors as well. And I think that's the danger. And we haven't even talked about sort of the underground criminal element, nation state sort of attacking each other. Um, we can't control that in the business world. In the business world, we can only do what we can do. We have, I think, 2 minutes left. I want to do a lightning round with both of you. Anna, you start with your most important takeaway that you want to leave, our participants in this panel. What are your thoughts? What kind of a helpful takeaway do you have for them?
So I think building on what we were just talking about, if there's one thing to remember, it's this. Technology sets the pace, but people set the direction. The organizations that will lead the sustainable transitions are the ones that equip their people at every level to turn data into decisions and innovation into action. And that's how digital becomes more than a tool. It becomes a competitive advantage because I'm always looking for what's in it for them. And in a world where performance and impact go hand in hand, it's also how you attract capital and you build trust and lead with purpose.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anna. And Carolyn, your thoughts, your final thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many. In terms of, climate risks are not going away. In fact, they're going to be coming worse over time, right? I think there's a lot in this turbulent time, right? As, Andrea pointed out, these tectonic shifts that are occurring is also to control what you can, right? In terms of where
Well, apologies,
And we
everyone.
all bounced back, and we all bounced back. So I have to apologize to everyone online because I see that I started the breakout rooms early, and so people weren't ready. So Lindy joined us late, and Lindy didn't have a chance to do a presentation. Did everybody have a chance to conclude? No, Lindy didn't. And Andrea, how did your session go?
We almost finished on time. Carolyn was in mid-sentence. We were doing a lightning round of takeaways. So we did okay.
Oh, brilliant. And who was the other panel was Evelyn, that was your stream, was it? No, you're on
That
mute.
was Owen.
Oh, it was Owen's stream. Yes.
Yes.
Did you manage to finish?
We did, Carolyn.
Oh, you did. Fantastic. So I know that we've got 10 minutes now before we go into our next breakout session. So Eve, we've got the next breakout session is at the bottom of the hour. Is that correct?
Yes, we'll be starting
Great.
in 10 minutes. So we'll just give
Great.
her a quick 10-minute debrief and then we'll dive right in.
Yeah, thank you. So I would like to ask Carolyn if you would like to finish and we can then go to, I'd really like to see Lindy and what Lindy had to say as well, because we missed out on what Lindy said. Carolyn, do you want to finish your discussion?
Oh, well, thank you. I was just saying to Andrea in the chat, thank you. She did a brilliant job. And great questions from those that joined us. Yeah, I just said, control what you can. There's so many risks that our companies and organizations, institutions are confronting, climate, a lot of trade turbulence, but sort of staying steadfast in commitments, and, kind of controlling what you can in an environment where there's significant uncertainty.
Thanks. And Andrea, what did your discussion focus on in your panel?
So I started alone, but we got my two panelists to join early, which was great. So we were able to rescue me, so to speak. But we focused on two themes. One was business and innovation generally, but one theme focused on energy and sustainable energy. And that's what Carolyn was focused mostly on. And then Anna Ransley, our other panelist, she talked about tech and innovation, tech and sustainability. And so both of them really gave us some major themes that they see emerging around the world. We had some great comments from our group, from our breakout group, which we addressed. I'll slip in my final takeaway. We had a lightning round, so we had Anna and Carolyn in midstream, which she just finished, and my takeaway, which goes back to my opening, which is we all need to have, as business people, as people in civil society, as people in government roles, we need to have situational awareness of the big picture of what's happening. We are entering the fifth industrial or post-industrial revolution. And if we don't have that big picture sense of what the megatrends are and how they translate back into our footprint, we are going to lose the narrative and everything else that we're doing, because we have to maintain, it's a marathon, but a fast marathon at the end of the day. So that was my concluding thought that I get to say now.